What's up, everybody? Jones here, back with another post-Thanksgiving video. I hope everybody had a great, safe holiday. My holiday was great, do the family and friends thing. It was a good time had by all. I had a lot of good food, cooked most of it, but it was still a lot of good food. I know I haven't made a video in a while. I've been pretty busy. It's the end of the semester for college students everywhere, and it's just a lot of work, a lot of papers, a lot of studying, a lot of preparing, not a lot of, free time. That's not what I want to talk to you guys about. Just kind of want to talk about how, my water changes. I just did my weekly water change. And I do weekly water changes. I do 50% water changes. And it works for me really well. And everybody's different. Everybody's tank is sort of different. But if it works for you, it works for you. For my tank, I guess you define it as a moderately planted tank. I don't really know, because I don't really think this is like a lightly planted tank at all. Moderate, definitely not heavy yet. Ultimately, I want it to be pretty heavily planted, but one step at a time. You got to crawl before you can walk. But like I said, it's I do 50% water changes. It works for me. Because a wise man once said that in this hobby, as much as you think otherwise, you really aren't fish keeping per se. Your water keeping, having water with the correct temperature, correct bacteria levels, pH levels, the whole 9 yards is really, monumentally important to keeping your fish and keeping your plants. Without it, you run the risk of your plants and your fish, becoming diseased, stunted growth, fish loss, plant loss, the whole 9 yards, and that's no good for anybody, So ultimately, if you're in this to take it even moderately seriously, and it's a hobby, so you can't really take it too seriously, but in terms of doing it with the least amount of problems possible, you're water keeping, you're not fish keeping. Having flourishing plants and fish is really just a byproduct of keeping your water, proper. I just take my 5-gallon bucket, siphon the water out. I don't really like to dig into the substrate too much, obviously, because that's where the plants are getting a lot of the nutrients. But I kind of hit the spots where there's not a lot of plants, and I don't really necessarily plan on getting a lot of plants or planting any plants in the time relative to the next 7 or 8 months. So this whole area I want to keep clean for a while. I like the way it looks right now, so I can come up, until I get better CO2, better lights, maybe some dry ferts, and then I'll, dig into really intense foreground plants. Obviously, my pygmy swords here are not doing very amazing, and I kind of knew this was going to happen. I had an idea that it was going to be a situation where they're just the CO2, the lights, just not good enough. But hopefully, by March of next year, I'll have a whole new equipment set up, or at least close. I'm gonna get some additional lights here and here, some plant lights. Getting rid of my hang on the backs, and they're little workhorses. They've gotten me through some serious times, but it's time for a canister filter, ultimately. And that's a whole other conversation for another time. Trying to figure out, what kind of canister to get. Finding one that's affordable, because a good canister is expensive. I don't have that type of money. So I don't really necessarily want something used. I'm willing to think about it, but it'd have to be in pretty good condition. So, there's always Craigslist for stuff like that. Either way, I think that big water changes are really important to the health and happiness of your fish. And since I've adopted my 50% weekly water changes, I suffered really no real fish loss. Usually, at least in the experience of a lot of the more experienced fish keepers that I know, people who've been in the hobby for a long time, a lot of the older guys and gals, when I tell them that, I've got some fry, like I got 20 fry here. I had, I think, in this group, 27 or 28. They always expect for me to tell them within a few weeks that I've lost half of them, that I lost, 10 of them, 6 of them. Nope. In this batch, these guys, they're just under 4 months old. I lost 1 in the very beginning. He was malformed, so you knew he wasn't going to last very long. And in these guys, it's bright light, sorry guys, I haven't lost any. and they are just under 2 months old. So, you know, it's just high quality water. I've been really fortunate. Maybe I'm just really lucky, or maybe the parents are just, really good genes. I don't know what it is, but so far, no real fish loss. The only fish that died, 2 of which jumped out of the tank, and that's the risky run having an open tank. But I like having an open tank. I don't like covering it up. One day that might change, but. And the other fish that died, actually, it's not funny. It's pretty sad, actually. They choked on pellets. That's my fault. I called myself trying to feed my my rainbow back there. Where's Shard at? Hold on, Shard doesn't like being on camera. If you can see her or not. But yeah. She's a bottom feeder. So, she's a big fan of pellets and floating food. Well, unfortunately, some of my glass catfish were too, and they would just get it lodged in their throats and die. So I switched, after losing 2 of those catfish the exact same way. I decided, it's obviously not worth it anymore, it's not working. So I invested in some of these tablets with one of these guys right on the cover, so it works out pretty well. And I haven't had any problems since then. But yeah, water changes, really important. Anybody who's just getting into this hobby, who just happens to stumble across my video, water change. If you have a 20-gallon tank, I seriously, honestly suggest, if you're not going to do it weekly, do it every other week. If you have a 20-gallon tank and you got like 6 fish in it, if you're feeding them, you're probably overfeeding them. I think everybody starts out overfeeding their fish. I know I overfeed my fish, but it's mostly because I have plants. It helps. But, don't be afraid to do frequent water changes. It's not going to hurt them as long as you're really careful with the temperature. And, and after a while, you start kind of gauging what your fish can handle, what they can handle. I was really, paranoid in the very beginning with my tank, my 20-gallon, and my 55, really. When it came to, getting the correct temperature, because everybody told me, you got to make sure it's this, this, and this, and make sure you don't want to shock them, and I find, again, it kind of gets to a point that I'm trying to get to is that, everybody has opinions and experiences in fish keeping and water keeping. Everybody's right in a way, at least in my opinion, everybody's right. In the sense that just because it works for me and how I do it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for your tank. There are so many variables involved with tanks. It's very rare that you're going to come across 2 tanks that are exactly the same in every way possible. It's almost, I feel, impossible. Substrate makes a difference. Filtration makes a difference. What you have in your filter. Look, and I'm going to do a video on my filters. I know my tank's kind of dirty. I'm gonna do a video on my filters one day soon. What you put in your filters make a difference. What you dose your water with makes a difference. If you dose your water, the chlorine levels in your city's area makes a difference. Everything makes a difference when it comes to your tank. So I could turn to you and say, well, I do it this way. I do once a week, and you turn to tell me and say, well, I do water changes once a month, and I have almost the exact same setup as you, and I haven't had any problems. Well, you know what? You're either really, really, really lucky, or you're just better than me. But either way, if it works for you, it works for you. If it works for me, it works for me. But that being said, there are a lot of us out there who, have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, and I'm by far, and I'll say this over and over again, I'm not an expert. I have experience, and that's why I really make these videos, just kind of, from my perspective, from an barely intermediate perspective, give my experiences and what my thoughts are with my experiences with this tank and my 20-gallon that I had before, and just kind of, if you have any questions or just, I started out that way when I first started getting into this. I would just go on YouTube and just type in a question, and I find tons of videos of people just like myself who've been doing this for a couple years and just kind of, well, do this, and this is how I do it. And I would just take that idea and I'd manipulate it and I'd kind of articulate it in a way that helped me out. And sometimes it worked for me, sometimes it didn't. But there's just, there's a wealth of information out there at your fingertips on YouTube, on, all sorts of aquarium websites and hobby websites. So don't be afraid, and if for some strange reason you have a question, feel free to throw a question in my comment box, you know, or a like, or a subscription, or all of them. That's fine too. I'll take it. I'm not picky. But yeah, 50% water changes. That's how I do it. I recommend doing it that way with any tank, especially if it's planted, and especially if you plan on doing, like, you know, fertilizers and, you know, your primes and all sorts of stuff. It's really important to just, you know, go balls deep and just do 50% water changes. Either way, that's really all I had to say about that. This video went way longer than I planned on it, but it was a good video. I think maybe next week or maybe by this weekend I might do a video on my filters and maybe my equipment aquarium, as I like to call it. But Jones, signing out. Shoot me a comment, subscription, a like, whatever you want. Thanks for your time as always. You guys take it easy. Later.